Thank you. Thank you. Excellent work. That's why we have a consultant. I'm Kathy Williams, Yarmouth Town Planner. I just want to welcome everyone to the second meeting that we're having on the local comprehensive plan update. As you all know, this is an extremely important plan for the town of Yarmouth. It kind of decides where we're going to be heading in the next 10 plus years or so. So it's really important that you guys all came out and offered hopefully be offering some great insights for us this evening. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Bagg from BSC Group, who's going to start the presentation.
Thanks, Kathy. Thank you, everybody, for being here and coming out. This is, as Kathy said, really important for the town. We had about 38 seats set out in this room, so we have a packed house in person, and that's awesome. And then we have people online. And so as we get started, we're just going to go over a couple quick details for people online. So the Zoom is a great function to allow people to join from home. They are going to be entered, and then the sessions that we'll have a little bit later online are going to be recorded, and BSC Group is hosting that part of the meeting. People are going to be muted until the end when there's a sort of a reporting out feature at the end of the online portion. And then Q&A for people online. If you have a technical issue or a question, please use the Q&A, and the two people online will help field those questions. And then in case there's anything disruptive that's happening online, the online portion will pause momentarily, so any issues can get sorted out. And so if you are online and for some reason the meeting shuts down, just hang tight, stay on the Zoom call if you can. You know, it could take a minute or two to resume the meeting, but we have that as a safety feature just in case something's happening. And then the meeting can be locked, so that's the online. But everyone in the room, thank you so much for coming. We're going to move on here. So we have an agenda. We're going to do a brief presentation. It's going to be about 20 minutes. And then one of the real key activities for us is to have these group discussions. And so you'll see throughout the tables, there's going to be a series of questions, facilitated discussion, and then someone from each group will report out so that the whole room can understand what kind of conversations were had. And then we'll briefly touch on next steps. And then on the right of this slide is some of the goals and objectives of this meeting. And the top and first and foremost is really just to continue to raise awareness that this whole process is happening. So the fact that you're all here is excellent. Tell your neighbors, tell your friends, tell other business owners that this process is underway, because the more people who are aware of it, the better it's going to be. Through this presentation, this is the second event. We had an open house, which I'll touch on in a minute. Here, we're gonna highlight the key issues and trends. We've been working since April to look at all the plans and information that the town has available and kind of identify these key issues. And we'll talk about that more. And then we're gonna conduct the facilitated groups. And we're really, looking for people to help us find solutions. So there are, a series of issues throughout the town that they're pretty common in municipalities, but we're looking for ways to solve them over time. And then this is really the other part of this meeting is going to be to help establish a growth policy. So we'll get into that in a minute. Where are we in the process? This is sort of not to scale, so there's years going by here, but on the left, the town conducted a very robust visioning process over the course of about a year. And that took place in 2020 and 2021. And hopefully some of you participated in those discussions. A lot of them were held online and via Zoom. And there was a survey that was really well received, over 800 responses to the survey. And all of that information is information that we have, and it's part of this process. Even though it happened a couple years ago, it's very informative. And then in April is when we started. September, we held the first community meeting, so it was an open house, and it was at the senior center, and it was really sort of a soft introduction to picking up the project again. And we had about 42 people who came through, and we did some exercises where people used sticky dots to kind of look at some important issues in Yarmouth, and we got some good feedback. Here we are today. This is the second community meeting. And from here, we're aiming to have a full, complete draft of the LCP by May. And we would like to engage the public again via a survey in June or July to just make sure that we got everything right and that we're hearing the right things and everyone can participate by looking at that survey before everything's finalized. In August or thereabouts, the planning board will hold a formal public hearing. It's part of the process of adoption of the LCP is the planning board holds this public hearing. And then in October or May, whenever the fall town meeting is, town meeting as a body will adopt the local comprehensive plan. And then finally, the last step in the process is certification by the Cape Cod Commission. So that's kind of our timeline for the project. And what we really want to help people understand is what is this local comprehensive plan and why is it important? The town has been working on this since 2020. But there have been previous iterations. So there's other information available, going back, 2007 and 2014 were kind of key milestones for the town's previous local comprehensive plan, and this is updating everything. It really serves as a guide. It's a resource that the town, kind of in all its components, will use moving forward, and so it has different parts and different things get covered. So as I mentioned, the vision statement was done already, and so it's a really robust look at the projecting what Yarmouth will be in 10 or 20 years, and it's a forward-looking statement about the positive elements of Yarmouth, and everything else fills in under that. So goals and objectives and strategies are all in place to help achieve that vision. We look at existing conditions, so things like demographics and economic data is part of the general analysis, and then key issues and needs. And that's kind of where we are tonight, is we're going to, Kathy's actually going to present a summary of some of the key issues. And then we will be looking at recent actions by town across the range of topics. And we definitely want to say that Yarmouth is ahead of the curve. The number of studies and effort that has been put in to keep Yarmouth looking forward is tremendous. And so part of our job is to gather all that and make it easy for people to absorb and see all this progress. Part of it is capital infrastructure and facilities planning. And again, to complement the town, starting at the town administrator, the assistant town administrator, the finance department, the capital budget planning committee are all working super hard to really look at the way a lot of these projects get funded by you all. And so we will be gleaning from that and pulling it into this LCP. Community goals is the synopsis of the whole process and to kind of capture the essence of Yarmouth's true goals. We will look at housing as a component of this. And again, the town has a robust housing production plan. And some of the questions that the groups will work on tonight are also related to housing. And then finally, there's a targeted action plan, because as we look ahead 10 years from now, it's a bit of a laundry list. It's a long list of things that need to happen. And the targeted action plan helps the town prioritize them, make decisions about the order of operations, and really looking for things that can be grouped together. Any opportunity to do one project but have multiple positive outcomes is really important, and that's a great thing. At the end, it's adopted by town meeting, and that's really to ensure community awareness and support, and then it's certified by the Cape Cod Commission. So just two quick additional notes here that in other communities all throughout Massachusetts, sometimes it's called a master plan, sometimes it's called a comprehensive plan, and they are required by the state for towns to do this. Where there's an extra layer is in Cape Cod, the Cape Cod Commission actually has the step to require them to be certified, and that doesn't happen. So in like Western Massachusetts, there is no certifying group. It's just, your planning board adopts it, and then you hope the town uses it. The other thing that it's important to mention is that there are a couple of things that this local comprehensive plan is not. So as we move forward, we're going to talk a lot about things like zoning and potentially ways that the town might need to invest money into certain projects. The local comprehensive plan doesn't change the zoning by itself. It doesn't appropriate any funds for anything, and it doesn't create localized plans. So for one example, studying Route 28 or the economic development potential of Route 28, We will probably recommend that, but this plan by itself doesn't do that. It might identify it as an action item that the town will have to take at a later date. Great. So this slide is really intended to kind of show some elements of the vision plan. It's an 8-page document that really summarizes the things that the town wants to promote, the things that the town wants to preserve, and what embodies Yarmouth moving forward. And so, there's a blurb there about how the forward-thinking view of Yarmouth is a place that's attractive, affordable, and inclusive community that values a clean, healthy environment, strong economic base with diverse business interests, abundant places for fun, leisure, and socializing, and educational excellence. And that's great. Those are really aspirational things that the town wants to achieve. And everything that we do now are goals that help achieve those items. You can see the groupings on the right. A few other really important documents that are new and very detailed and provide a lot of information are the Open Space and Recreation Plan that was done in 2023, approved by the state last year in 2024, and the Housing Production Plan. So we, as a group, want to pull from those documents. They had a lot of community engagement. They have a lot of detailed information and data, and they also have solutions and strategies within themselves. So we're pulling those through this process. And Kathy actually is probably going to talk about quite a few more as Kathy does some overview of the key issues. Just a quick summary of the public engagement. So that's a photo of the open house from September. Kathy did National Night Out with the police department and had a table, and the Seaside Festival. Kathy and a member from BSC were there. Those are kind of walk-up interactions with people, just to give them a little postcard, say, hey, have you heard about this project? And try to get them to one of these meetings or to participate in some way. The community open house was great. It was a great way for people to introduce themselves to the project. We have a project website, which has a lot of the existing plans. It gives you an opportunity to provide comments online. And then there's also a crowdsource map. And we can talk about that, towards the end. It's an opportunity, if you like maps, it's an opportunity to go onto a map and make a comment or mark a place that is an issue, that if there's an intersection or a sidewalk, the map function really allows someone to get in there and make a comment, and we're tracking those. And then finally, stakeholder interviews. As part of our initial project, we met with the Chamber of Commerce and several business owners to understand a general sense of the business climate. And we met with a variety of department heads, your DPW director, your police chief, and your fire chief, just to get a sense of those key departments. I'll probably go quickly through this, but we have some general demographics. One in the middle is the total population. Right now, the census from 2024 shows the population of Yarmouth at 25,618 people. Below that, there's a significant increase over the summer. It's a 199% increase, and that's really important. It resonates through all the discussion and pieces of information and your experiences. And then 2029, the projected growth goes up, and the rough number is we would expect, based on census, to increase the population by about 320 people, which is a modest amount of growth. But it has to be dealt with, and it has to be planned and coordinated, and that's some of the things that we'll talk about in these small groups tonight. Kind of talking about the RPP, that's the Regional Policy Plan. So that's the plan that's put out by the Cape Cod Commission, and they are asking all communities to make sure that your goals are in line and support the general goals for the overall Cape. And we think that they do, and it's not a difficult task. On the left are the groups, these groupings that the Cape Cod Commission uses to break up the subjects into the natural systems, built systems, and community systems. And then on the right are the categories that Kathy will actually talk about in a little bit more detail. The things that we're looking at specifically for Yarmouth are on the right. And there's a whole bunch of them. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy. And we're trying to keep it relatively brief, but Kathy has a lot to explain.
I like to talk. The good thing is I talk fast. So we've heard a lot from multiple ways through our community that were outlined, but also through different plans and studies, and just being in the community for the last 12 or 13 years, I've learned a lot. So we've heard a lot about what the concerns of the key issues are and concerns, but we're also doing a lot. So I'm just going to go very briefly over some of the key issues, but then also what we're kind of doing right now to address those. And then we can start thinking about, well, what else do we need to do to continue with addressing these issues? So the first one is related to the water resources, which is fresh marine and ocean and can include drinking water. So what are we kind of doing for that? What are some of our concerns? Contamination from our septic.
Could I ask that you maybe adjust your microphone, because as you look to the screen, it's your voice.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll just face the screen. So we have contamination from septic systems, we all know that, also from stormwater runoff and sometimes from fertilizer. Some of the things that we're doing to address that, obviously, is our municipal wastewater program. We're actively in construction of Phase 1. We've also updated our stormwater regulations to require treatment for larger projects. We also have a fertilizer education program. So we're also concerned about our drinking water quality with the PFAS that we've been having some issues with. We're addressing that through having a treatment facility, a PFAS treatment at 2 of our wells, and we're also looking at designing one for another 2 of our wells that have higher levels of PFAS. And also with regard to quantity, do we have adequate quantity of water to address our needs? So we also have a water conservation policy that was completed in 2022. We also have concerns, we're doing Phase 1, but we also need to be sure that we have enough money for our future phases of our wastewater program, so we need to address those issues. We also need to find sufficient locations for effluent discharge locations, so that's the treated water that comes out of the treatment facility. Where can that go? We did have some funding that was authorized in special town meeting to look at some alternative sites, including Bayberry Hills Golf Course, so we're working on that. And then also tidal restrictions, limiting the tidal flows in Flushing has problems with water quality, causes invasive species, so we've been successful in dealing with some of these. We just did the Parkers River Route 28 bridge back in 2021, and we also are working with the Friends of Bass River on the North Dennis Road culvert and also the Weir Road culvert, which are also tidal restrictions. So looking at wetlands, plants, wildlife habitat, and open space, all of those resources are having a lot of pressures from development, so we want to be sure that we're addressing those. We also have increases in invasive species. We have some funding. We are working on invasive species management on many of our town properties. We're also working on the parks in the West Yarmouth parks. There's a very extensive invasive species management program going on there, as well as at the Riverwalk Park. We did quite a bit of invasive species management there. Sea level rise and all the impacts on our salt marshes and on our bordering vegetated wetlands. One of the things that we have identified is some properties that where our salt marsh might be migrating to, something we might want to look at protecting in the future. And then we also have a number of wetlands and abandoned bogs that are in need of restoration. We have the Cape Cod Hospital Bayview bogs, and also looking at, working with the Friends of Bass River, looking at restoring old bogs and natural wetlands in the upper reaches of the Bass River. So we are doing a lot already to address some of these issues. Moving on to built systems, we have our community design and land use. We want to be sure that we're developing in suitable locations. We heard that over and over again. We want to be developing in places that have sewers, perhaps, and also places that are not impacting any wetlands or environmental resources. We also want to be sure that we're preserving Route 28, which is our main commercial corridor, for commercial endeavors or for mixed-use endeavors. We also get a lot of comments about the aesthetics of Route 28. I think we've come a long way, baby, but we got a long way to go. We also don't really have a well-defined walkable village centers. We're trying to work on one on Route 6A in the village centers, but we don't have like a main business downtown like some other communities have. We also want to be looking at different housing opportunities. We'll talk about housing in more detail later. And then another thing that we heard was simplifying permitting and allowing more uses by right for people who want to come and actually invest in our community and making it something that they can do, but also getting the aesthetics that we're looking for. And then, of course, we don't want to do any development where we don't have adequate infrastructure. Moving on to transportation and connectivity, we actually have a lot of things going on with that as well. We're seeing concerns with speeding, traffic congestion, and safety, not just in the summertime, but also all year round. And also we have multiple intersections that are on the high crash list. Fortunately, we also have a lot of these things happening on state-owned roads, Route 28 and Route 6A. So we are fortunate enough that Mass DOT has a lot of projects that are going on in the town of Yarmouth that are going to address some of these. We have the Bass River Bridge replacement that's happening, and also the Four Corners corners there at the lights at the North Main and Old Main. That was a high crash area. That's in design, it's already been bid and should be starting construction this year. Mass DOT is also looking at a very detailed Route 28 corridor study that's currently in design all the way from Yarmouth Road on Route 28 in Barnstable, coming all the way through to Parker's River. And that's going to be including a bunch of different multimodal aspects to it as well. We've heard a lot about people concerned about Station Avenue traffic. We now have 3 schools there, and we have the businesses, and that is actually our main access route to Route 6. We are working with the Cape Cod Commission and have done a Station Avenue corridor study. They met with the Select Board on January 7th to kind of go over some preliminary recommendations. We're going to be finalizing that, and out of that report, we'll get some recommendations that will get incorporated into the local comprehensive plan. As we all know, we're very dependent on cars with more commuting. I think I've heard 45 to 50% of our workers come from off Cape. So what can we do with our bicycle and pedestrian connectivity and safety in order to get people out of their cars around town and get to the places that they want to go? So we do have the shared use pathway that we've installed on Higgins Kroll Road. We are also going to be extending the Cape Cod Rail Trail through to Barnstable. And then all these Route 28 projects that I'm talking about, all of them have shared use pathways on them along Route 28 as well. Continuing with built systems is coastal resiliency. Obviously, that's something that's very important to us as a coastal community. We've seen more storms, more severe storms with coastal and inland flooding. One of the things that we are working on right now is our hazard mitigation plan update. We are having a survey out right now, and it's extended through February 7th. There's a flyer out there. If you haven't taken the survey, please take the survey. We're also concerned about some of our low-lying roads flooding and how can emergency vehicles get to people in need, or how can they get out of a particular area. So we are working on a study looking at impacts of flooding south of Route 28. They're having a public meeting Monday night by Zoom at 5:30. Again, there's a flyer out there for you to participate in that. Coastal erosion and shoreline change, that's a natural process, but it often gets exacerbated by storms. So what are we doing? We have a very good dredging program. We got our dredging permit, and we can do beach nourishment from the dredge that we have. We also received a Seaport grant to work with Dennis to actually get a dredging permit for the upper reaches of the Bass River, which I don't believe have ever been dredged. And then we also want to make sure that the location of our critical facilities aren't subject to coastal storms and that type of thing. So we have completed a vulnerability assessment of all our municipal facilities, which led to a packet landing marina resiliency project that's currently being designed right now, because that's where we dock all of our public safety boats. So we want to make sure that that's safe, and we're also looking at a feasibility study for Fire Station number 1. Climate mitigation and sustainability, that's like how can we reduce our greenhouse gases and be more efficient. One of the things people were talking about was having more electric chargers around town. We do have some at municipal buildings, but I think as we move more towards electric vehicles, we're going to need to have more of those around town and make sure that we allow for that opportunity. Also, solar opportunities, ground-mounted, roof-mounted, or maybe solar canopies over parking lots. Those are things that we need to be looking at. And of course, energy conservation and efficiencies. We are a green community, so we are moving our whole municipal fleet over to greener vehicles and working on increasing our equipment efficiencies in pumps and things like that. And then we're also looking at waste reduction. So that's your typical reduce, reuse, recycle, and repair. Costs of getting rid of our waste is going higher, and there's fewer and fewer locations to do that. So maybe we start looking at making waste a resource. How can we use all these organic materials to generate either fuels, or a new word that I learned with the Recycling and Solid Waste Committee, biochar, which is something that which is something that you can use as a soil amendment. So there's a lot of opportunities there. The last thing on built systems is our capital infrastructure and facilities. So how are we addressing all of our capital needs so that we can grow? We have we're obviously going to have a significant municipal wastewater program funding. We're on phase 1 of an 8-phase program, so we need to find out ways that we can pay for that. We also want to be sure that we have a detailed 10-year municipal building facilities and vehicle capital plan, so we can figure out when we can put these things in and level out the tax rate as we're going through. The school's currently working on a long-range capital plan. We also need to make sure that we have a capital plan to address our shoreline protection and coastal infrastructure, which we don't really have right now. And then unfortunately, there's so many unknowns that could have impacts to us on capital from a capital nature, whether it's a regulatory or climate change. So those are things that we need to be a little bit more flexible and adaptable to. We want to be sure that we can have access to high-speed internet for our businesses and for our residents. And then, again, regular maintenance of all of our municipal assets in the annual budget, so we're not letting something get to the point where it becomes a capital project. We're dealing with it on a regular basis through maintenance. Community systems, community character and cultural heritage. I mean, this is something we're very interested in, preserving our historic nature and also promoting it. We have a Revolutionary War monument that's going to be going up, as well as markers at some of the cemeteries, and historic interpretive signage that's been going up around town to let people know more about our history. Public art is another component. We have recently gotten approval for a public art committee, and they're going to start forming and start looking at different ways we can put public art on public lands. And then looking at different ways of having shoulder season special events. So maybe Yarmouth can be known for certain special events in the shoulder seasons to draw people to our community. The next two are probably the biggest heavy hitters: the economy and housing. As Jeff did mention, we did meet with the business community and got some better insights on some of the things that are going on, specifically with the tourism, because there is a lot more competition from other venues, and we're getting less repeat customers, so to speak, from those annual family vacations, and we're having difficulty necessarily attracting a younger crowd to come to Cape Cod. So that's had some impact on them. We obviously have a heavy reliance on tourism-related jobs and not a lot of diversity of other types of year-round jobs. We also have limited activities and venues that really would attract younger people to come to Yarmouth. And difficulty attracting and retaining year-round and seasonal employees, and that ties directly into the limited affordable workforce housing that we have. If businesses can't find employees because they can't find housing, our businesses can't grow and they're not sustainable. So that's something that really plays into the housing needs in our community. And then again, talking about permitting, which can be lengthy, costly, and unpredictable. So we want to make it a little bit more predictable, I think, for developers coming to our community who are spending millions and millions of dollars in the town of Yarmouth. The housing, a lot of this is all related to the excellent housing production plan that was developed by our community. Obviously, we all know what the issues are. We have low inventory, high costs for all types of housing. We have workforce housing issues, again, talking about that for business sustainability and economic growth. We don't have the seasonal and year-round housing that we need for our workers. And it's housing needs for a wide range of our residents and workers. It's not just, oh, we need more senior housing. We need more housing and tick every single box in our community for veterans, for singles, for couples, for families, pretty much everybody. One of the things playing a role in our housing issues is everyone might say, wow, we have a lot of housing in town. Why don't we have enough housing? Because 32% of it is being used by second homeowners and not available for year-round use. We're also seeing an increased usage of homes for short-term rentals from what we saw even 3-4 years ago. So that's impacting potentially year-round housing. We are working with UMass Dartmouth on a short-term rental study in order to look at the different benefits and what we might be able to recommend to incorporate short-term rentals in, but also making sure that we're not having an impact on our housing. And again, the more workers are commuting from off Cape, we really need, again, to link the housing with suitable infrastructure. We don't want to solve one problem with housing and then be creating another environmental problem or exacerbating our environmental problem over here. And again, the housing production plan calls for a goal of 10% affordable housing on the subsidized housing inventory. We're about 5% now. Yeah, so we're halfway there. And then the last thing in community systems, this isn't really in the Cape Cod Commission's LCP, but these are things that came out of all these different conversations we've been having over the years. So looking at town services, having enhanced communication, more civic engagement like you're doing tonight, excellent. And then having easy access to information so people know exactly where to go to find out what's going on. Oops, I'm sorry. Going on with the town of Yarmouth. We do have a communications director now, which is great, Lori Sullivan, and we also have a communication strategy. She gave a presentation recently to the select board on that. And as much as businesses have problems attracting and retaining employees, so does the town of Yarmouth. Lots of times other towns are being more attractive than the town of Yarmouth, and we're losing employees just to other towns. So even if you have housing, we're losing them to other towns who have more advantageous benefit packages. We recently did at special town meeting get some type of incentive package for police and fire. I think it was $100,000 to help incentivize people with bonuses, sign-on bonuses and that type of thing, to see if we could get people to come. We also heard a lot about early coordination with the schools on the annual budget and their capital planning. Lots of times we don't hear about things until too late. Our property taxes cover about 45 or 50% of that is for schools. So that's a big nut. So we want to be involved and be at the table a little bit earlier on that. And that seems to be happening. And the schools are working on their 10-year capital plan as well. Modernized library facilities and services. I think Jane Kane is here, our library. And they recently received a $100,000 library planning, design, and construction grant, which is supplemented with a town match of $125,000 to be looking at, I think, siting a library, or whether we're going to go to someplace new, or whether we're going to start, do some redevelopment in our existing libraries, and then start working on the design for upgrades to our library system. And then, of course, the senior center facilities needs upgrades and maintaining the services, because we have a particularly high percentage of senior citizens in the town of Yarmouth. And the other thing that's very important to the town of Yarmouth is our recreation. It's one of the things that we all love about it. So we're looking for more year-round recreational opportunities and programming for all ages. I think we've seen a lot of benefit of the use of the former Mattakees Middle School gym. That's been heavily used by the Recreation Department, and it shows how there's a need for it and people are going to be using it. We also are working on a recreational capital needs assessment. So just like we want capital assessments on all these other buildings, and we want to make sure that we're doing the same thing for our recreational facilities. And we did have an RFP out, so we have a proposal for that, so that study should be starting soon. We want to be sure that we're sustaining our recreational shellfish and fisheries, and we recently had an oyster project. Upweller at Packet Landing is now has more of a public educational component to it, so people can learn more about how we go about all of this. And of course, we all know how important golf courses can be to our tourist economy, so promoting that. And I'm going to hand it back to Jeff.
Thank you, Kathy. That was impressive. Maybe a little overwhelming. I think there's a sense that there's a lot to absorb, and we appreciate that. I really want to reiterate that, for us kind of helping the town, there's a tremendous amount of work being done already. So if you heard Kathy say, we're looking at that, and we're looking at this, and we're looking at that, that's really impressive. And we honestly don't get that in every community. A lot of communities have those items on their list to do, and Yarmouth has been doing a lot of that work already. So really a round of applause for Kathy and everybody who's been part of that. It's I've been working on this project for about 10 months, and it's a little overwhelming, but it's all positive. And as we move through, I have maybe a slide or two more, and then we're going to have these discussions. What we're going to be asking people to do is kind of put a thinking cap on that. Maybe it's a little bit different way to think than you might normally think. So trying to think about your town in at least 10 years from now. And it's a hard exercise. Not everyone can do it easily, but it's really something where it's a little less about what you personally think or need, and more about what do you think would help the town. Kind of understanding the scope of some of these projects, trying to figure out what would help the town the most moving forward into the future. And so that's an exercise that doesn't come easily for everybody, but that's kind of the conversations that we're going to have around the tables. And the overarching place that we're trying to get some additional input and consensus on is this growth policy. So again, the Cape Cod Commission asks these towns to come up with a policy for how do you want to manage future growth. And there's a lot to this, but the idea that we have is for the group discussions to kind of tackle 4 specific topics, and let's see what we can get for conversation about those topics. But before we do that, I just want to finish on this slide. The images across the top are called place types, and it's something that was created by the Cape Cod Commission, and it's actually pretty useful because it does set out some basic parameters, some themes that other towns in Cape Cod also experience. So if you look at them, like the natural areas, that's a really common component across the Cape. And then you kind of traverse this all the way to some towns have the military transportation areas. So if you think, the Barnstable Airport, there's industrial activity areas. These are where you have some of your business, your business enterprises. You have industrial parks, and so that's a theme, and that's important because the Cape Cod Commission is actually trying to acknowledge that those exist, and then the conversations are about how do you manage growth in those areas, kind of getting down to community activity centers, historic areas, and suburban development areas. So those are just examples that we'll see as we go through the LCP process. Those will be examples that we'll talk about. But the growth policy is really looking at understanding that the town probably needs to grow. There's always this conversation about whether a town actually needs to grow, but there is this sort of natural tendency for a town to grow, and the growth policy helps steer it. As Kathy kind of said, we don't want it near wetlands or in flood zones, but you have some areas that are already developed. You have some areas that will have sewer. And so we have some questions built in for the rest of the meeting to talk about, some examples that people we want to talk to you about those. So then the questions are, managed growth and development, that, what kind of growth are we talking about? And then economic growth should be focused in these certain areas. And so we have some questions to ask you all. And then as the community does grow and evolve, ensure protection of, natural resources. And certain other elements that we'll talk about. So we understand that this can be challenging, but so we're asking you to put your thinking caps on, think at least 10 years away, and then we'll go into these exercises momentarily. So the topics that we're going to talk about are across the top here. So as Kathy said, the heavy hitters are the areas that we want to get a little bit more feedback on. So from you in the room or you online, talking about the economy, land use, housing, and coastal resiliency and sustainability. Those are really important elements to growth. And so by having these conversations, we should come up with a growth policy that we can kind of articulate for the town moving forward. So for the folks online, we have two BSC staff people online, and they're going to break that group off into two groups online, and they're going to have conversations, the same set of questions in the room and online. And then after about an hour, those people are going to come back, and someone on the TV will explain what their groups talked about, and someone from each table here will also kind of give a quick explanation of what your table talked about. Again, we're all reviewing the same questions. We're thinking this might be an hour, and it seems like a lot, but 15 minutes per topic. We're going to have facilitators to try to move people through the topics. And then the reporting out. So we should have a planning board member, hopefully. Actually, I wanted to give a round of applause to the planning board members here. If you want to raise your hand, and raise your hand online too. I thought there was a couple more, but there's at least one online. The planning board members are residents and the volunteers, and they've been putting in a lot of time to help the town move through this process, and so their credit is much needed. So here we go. So I think we're going to kind of stop the presentation point, and we're going to have some facilitated discussions amongst the groups, and reconvene in about an hour and just kind of hear a report out from each group. Yes, a point of order type of question?
No, what about all the people around the
Correct, yes. So the people around the perimeter, we have a room, is it conference room B? B, it's over there. So we're going to have a separate room over there. So if you're around the perimeter, if you wouldn't mind, we'll go into that room over there. And then everyone should have a handout. So it's called a participant's guide. And if you don't have them, we have a couple more out front. So make sure you have a handout.
All right. Hi. Hello from the land of Zoom. So I'm only gonna, we had a really good conversation about all the different topics, just like you all did. I'm not gonna share every single thing that was said, but I'll hit a couple of highlights from the economy section. Specifically, there were a couple of ideas about sort of highlighting and reinforcing the asset that is the cultural center of Cape Cod, as well as the arts and art economy. Expanding beyond, in terms of our winter celebrations in town, beyond the winter carnival, and also highlighting some of the natural areas that can be used during the winter. We had a sort of extended back and forth in a very positive way about different kinds of tournaments and conventions, whether they're aquatic related or basketball related or hockey related, that could help fill hotels in the winter. Whether we're the primary location for actually hosting those events isn't as important necessarily as the fact that we have, a large source of hotel rooms compared to lots of other towns. So partnering with other towns in that respect. We also had a talk. We also talked a little bit about having a central place that we could celebrate the natural heritage of the Cape, as well as the Cape Cod history on a year-round basis. And that center idea would also be geared towards families and children, so that it wasn't just come to the Cape and go to the beach, but that there was a way to build connection to the actual place that you're in, and not just seeing it as a place to go to the beach and play mini golf. However, there was also some input for some town employees who were on the call with us, that through the libraries and the recreation department, that some of those programs already exist, which ties into another piece of it, which is to really emphasize and look at how the marketing, of all of these programs and all of these things is doing, and is there a way to sort of synthesize all the really cool things and great things that are going on in our town in some sort of quarterly, monthly, weekly way that is actually supported by the town as sort of a roundup of how things are going. So that's what we talked about in the environmental section. I'm going to keep rolling. All right, Oxa, you just tell me when I need to shut up. All right, land use. We definitely talked about the Matakees property. We also talked about the area adjacent to the Cape Cod Hospital. As it relates to question 1, in terms of, and question 2, question 1 only, my apology. We talked about the idea of a multi-use development at Matakees, specifically one that could potentially access different funding sources, so that whatever the outcome is on the Matakees property, it's not being funded completely by Yarmouth taxpayers, so that there's ways to find other sources of funds and other ways to help pay for whatever exciting, amazing things are going to happen there, and also leaving open the idea of having community space and meeting space, much like the Harwich Community Center offers, but right now that the town of Yarmouth doesn't. There was also some comments about specifically the traffic surrounding Cape Cod Hospital in terms of development, and how the hospital has expanded or continues to expand, and how that traffic and that development continues to impact Hyannis Park. And then we had a semi-long conversation about the fact that Yarmouth, unlike, let's say, Chatham or P-Town, doesn't have necessarily a walkable downtown. That isn't so much, there wasn't so much of a conversation about how to solve that problem, but more of a conversation about how it's nice when you go to parts of Harwich as well, but certainly downtown Chatham and P-Town, that there is sort of this walkability factor where you have shops and you have places to walk, and that promotes a very nice experience. Whereas I think in our town we have little pockets of those places. So for instance, potentially on 6A, potentially on parts of Route 28, but there isn't any one sort of place that everybody kind of goes to, unlike those other two towns. Let's see. Then we talked about housing. We love housing. We talked, a couple of the ideas were possibly partnering with Habitat for Humanity to promote low and median income ownership, especially at Matakees, but also in other areas of town when there are housing projects that are proposed. Also the concept of having more veteran ownership as well, veterans. Let's see here. There was also a conversation about how to slow down the growth of Airbnbs by incentivizing, having the town or state programs that incentivize individual homeowners to purchase housing stock and then turn around and create market rate rentals for families or the workforce in order to help slow down some of the Airbnb growth in our town. We also did touch on the fact that despite the ADU bylaw that was passed at town meeting not long ago, that the state of Massachusetts new housing bond bill is going to upset most of the regulations that we had worked very hard as a community to put into place, and that it's sort of a watch this space to see how that's all going to ripple out, because it's going to affect every town on the Cape, not just the town of Yarmouth. We also talked about this idea of how do you prioritize available housing or new housing projects for Yarmouth residents, and that that is something that should be not forgotten, or at least promoted, and if not promoted, made sure that there's a way to, keep Yarmouth residents at the top of a list if there is such a thing for a certain project, and not let housing opportunities go to residents of other places, despite the fact that we understand that housing pressure is a Cape-wide issue and not just a Yarmouth issue. And then someone did mention that, working backwards from 2035, to use the 10-year idea that was talked about at the beginning, is having a little more detail on what our projected demographics are going to be as a community in 2035. And if we can work backwards from there, that will help us inform what we're currently doing in 2025, which certainly makes a lot of sense. All right, last thing we talked about were the two coastal resiliency and sustainability questions. There was a conversation about flood insurance, about specifically the public education and awareness programs around flood insurance, about how it's funded. Is it available? If so, how much does it cost? And if so, what is it that you can actually, get out of it? Because there are places, not just in our town, but lots of places on the Cape that are finding it difficult, if not impossible, to get flood insurance. And with the acknowledgement that a critical weather event, it's sort of a when, not an if. We also quickly talked about a couple of locations in town. Specifically, there's some culverts in Hyannis Park that need some help, that are failing. Apparently there is a state fund, but there's a study that's needed in order to qualify, or at least get in line for those state funds, I believe. On the plus side, the Bayview Bogs project is a good thing. However, there are some houses that have been built on filled-in wetlands, and there's this idea of having sort of a review of how the town approaches rebuild policies on those properties. In other words, should those houses be allowed at all or replaced in those sensitive locations? Should they be raised? And I don't mean with a Z, I mean RAISED. Should they be literally elevated? And let's see, and then we also talked about how at Mattakese, if there is housing, and also in other housing projects in town, that those housing units should have solar on their roof, as well as in the parking, adjacent parking. And there was a quick conversation about a road in West Yarmouth along Mill Creek called Prince Road, where there was apparently, most recently, a pretty dangerous situation where someone who almost, their car almost got flooded during one of the last storms. So that was a lot in a short amount of time. I hope I didn't take up too much time. Thank you to AXA for being an amazing facilitator, and thanks to everybody who participated.
We'll set a high bar here. So we're going to switch to the other online group, and I think we're going to start to see some themes. And then as we, it's 8 o'clock, so really focus on the things that you haven't heard yet as much as possible. But this is going well. So the next group online, do you want to report out?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Excellent. Had a great group. Had a lot of good discussion. Everybody was very respectful, which really appreciated. Not sure if I've had that in these kind of groups before, but that was great. So in terms of economy, we talked about, the first question was regarding expanding tourism. So we talked about venue space, enhancing in public and private ones, or look at constructing new ones. There's comment that, the younger people, they need more than movies and mini golf, so they need to look at exploring other activities. And then, looking at the need for the center of town that's walkable, or pockets of these throughout the community, that would be beneficial for sure. Regarding Route 28 uses and projects, there was discussion about family-friendly uses along Route 28. Also, safe ways to get across Route 28 to potentially connect more easily some of those existing uses. But then also the advertising of various activities and events could probably be improved as well. In terms of the near-round jobs, still staying on economy, transportation definitely an issue, looking at getting on and off the Cape. But then also marketing Yarmouth as an accessible place, along Route 6, and the fact that Yarmouth could potentially do more to identify who it is and what the community has to offer on the greater Cape Cod. And then moving into land uses, where development would be supported. A lot of discussion about Route 28, especially the large blighted properties. Another particular area was near the West Yarmouth Post Office, Winslow Road and Route 28 intersection, and then also some comments about the South C Street area and the Route 28 intersection. Moving on to housing, ways to potentially create more housing in the community. A discussion about, actually, it seems kind of hard to rent to long-term tenants. There's definitely some challenges around that. And then the conversation shifted to potentially the blighted areas along Route 28 having a housing component when they get redeveloped. It was noted that businesses are probably hesitant to redevelop redevelop their properties unless they know they can get housing. So what can the community do to mix in housing to these developments along with the businesses that are potentially going to be there? The second question on housing, how to mitigate the increased costs of housing. We talked about the need for more housing programming, the need for more subsidies, and again, expanding incentives for business owners to incorporate housing as well. So a lot of incentives were discussed, or the need for those, I should say. In terms of coastal resiliency and reducing the impacts, one of the comments was reclaiming property and returning it to green space. So taking some of those existing asphalt areas and turning them back into green space, but then also doing something to mitigate these emerald green lawns along the shoreline where there's a lot of fertilizers and waters that's being used to give them their green look. This could probably benefit from some type of regulation by the community. But then also looking at how the town could be more sustainable, simply education, awareness, and constantly being out there and making people aware of their impacts and what's going on. And then also working with solar providers and somehow working solar panels into new construction. Hopefully that was just kind of a quick synopsis of everything, but I have a lot of comments down in my notes here that, we're going to take back and continue to analyze, but I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great, thanks online group. Is there any group here that really wants to go next? You can raise your hand. Okay, this table, yes, Heather's table.
Okay. There we go again. I'm going to come over here. So under economy, one of the bigger things we talked about was having a sports venue for the off season, not necessarily in the summer, but in the winter, spring, and fall, partnering with hotels to encourage people to come and bring in more youth sports, soccer, lacrosse, hockey, gymnastics, softball, pickleball, you name it. How is there a way to bring families in so that they are coming here in the winter, but then also turning to come here in the summer to do things in the summer? Maybe even a disability event around sports. So kids and parents will come and spend a couple days and kind of hook them in that way. In terms of Route 28 and uses along Route 28, replace the laundromat with another laundromat. More restaurants and more things to do and make it look like people actually live here. So there is a lack of energy along Route 28. How can you make it seem more vibrant and draw people in to want to stop? One thing that we talked about that came up a couple of times was having a trolley. Not necessarily RTA, but a trolley that is maybe free. We don't know who would operate it. It's just an idea. But a way to draw people in and have something fun for people to do. And that way they can park in one location and then they can take the trolley around. And that would help with traffic impacts. We've heard that Yarmouth is really hard to have a business in. So instead of focusing on business attraction from the start, find out why businesses may be leaving and how to overcome those challenges and make it easier for new businesses to come in. One thing that was mentioned was like an Aldi supermarket or the promotion of local small businesses. In terms of land use and areas for development, Great Island Plaza along Route 28, just the empty buildings, and really having a focus on the combination of housing and commercial development together. One thing we talked about was when promoting that, having mini centers. So finding a space to build housing, whether it's townhouses or apartments or whatever, and then having mixed use in the center of that development in a way that the mixed use really helps the residents around it. And then, there was talk about would it be okay for Route 28 to return to the hotel strip that it was in the past? Only if there's a demand for it. Affordable housing must be reasonable. Short-term rentals, we had some conversations about that and how hard it is to find short-term rentals for younger professionals who maybe want to live here, but they can't because it's not affordable. In terms of just coming to Yarmouth in general, there needs to be more charm, something more than the beach to bring people here. And finally, coastal resiliency. One idea was relocate the beach parking lots. And, here comes the shuttle system idea again, but getting rid of the pavement near the beach in a way that returns it to its natural landscape as an opportunity for beach nourishment. So looking at sustainability, more solar, eliminating fertilizer use or outlawing gas-powered motors for landscaping, more promotion of energy aggregation, and then in terms of trash on the beaches, especially in the summer, there's a lot of trash on the beaches, so how to be proactive about it, whether it's to add more trash cans, figure out the areas where there's really hot spots and try to address those. And then in closing, Route 28 is missing entertainment. Not having if you have people who are coming here for a longer stay, whether it's a week versus a couple days, having not like the overnight hotel motel, but having a nicer place for that. Traffic is an obstacle, and, oops, that was my final sheet. Thank you. Just taking advantage of Yarmouth's location on the Cape, using it as a home base to explore all of the Cape. And that's where this trolley system comes in again. Something fun to ride along the Route 28 corridor to the beaches and then to tour other parts of the Cape.
Great job, Bruce. Some uniqueness coming out of there along with the theme, so that's great. All right, next table, anybody want to raise their hand? Jim is pointing at you, Ken, so are you ready, this table? Okay.
Jim, you don't want to go last? Or you? Good evening. Did it come through? Yep. Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. No. So, nope.
Let's try that one.
I can hear you fine. I can hear you, Joe.
Just keep going.
Just keep going. Good evening, everyone. So, a lot of stuff that was discussed.
Still not on.
Don't take it personally. I'm not.
Good evening. There we go.
Okay, we got it. So a lot of stuff that's been discussed, or that was discussed at our table, has already been mentioned and discussed. So I'm just going to skim through the real highlights that hasn't been discussed. I think one of the ideas as far as expanding tourism to the town, we discussed quite a bit about, was just better promotion by the town of Yarmouth, whether it be by our communications director here that works at Town Hall, or whether we hire an outside advertising agency to promote the town. I do know that's money that comes out of the tourism fund currently is going towards the Yarmouth Chamber. They do a great job, but we do need to do a better job and a more comprehensive job of promoting the town of Yarmouth and everything that we currently have to offer, because I think a lot of it is people just don't know what we have here, even in the off-season. As far as what kind of projects you'd like to see along Route 28, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about hotels and everything else and light industry and all the stuff that we've said. But I think one of the first things after the sewage system is done, we really got to stay on the state to redevelop the roadway itself, whether it be better sidewalks, crosswalks, a turn lane, make Route 28 a better road as far as traversing it back and forth. I think the surge in that, and as a group we discussed, just having that stuff alone will help with the redevelopment of Route 28. Questions on land use? You know, the big thing, we spent a lot of time talking about Mattakese and what do we want to see out of that area? Whether it be, you know, a sports venue with the fields that are already there, or potentially a convention center, but looking at what happens with that facility. There's a huge opportunity in town. Also the area around the hospital, and then also talking about some arts and cultural districts, like, for example, around the current cultural center in South Yarmouth. But one of the biggest things that we talked about is having more walkable areas. I know that's been touched on quite a bit where there really isn't. You know, the one spot that I haven't heard a lot of discussion about was the Route 6A area, where right now we have some walkable areas, but having appropriate redevelopment along that area, both taking into consideration the business side and the residential side along that stretch on 6A, that there's plans, you know, forth to redevelop that section. Where am I here? Coastal resiliency. One of the things that was discussed was the county dredging program, that we really need to stay on the state to help support the erosion control of the spoils that come out of the dredge program. Really should be used to help redevelop our beach areas and just make those areas better, more resilient to erosion. We also talked about solar canopies over parking lots, that type of stuff to help get that, you know, going more. Is there anything I missed, Jeff? I don't think so.
Yep, you did great.
Okay, thank you.
No, second to last. Well, thank you, Jim. So we had a great group, and we had a lot of the similar comments made. I'm just going to run through my notes. I don't have it all gelled up. But again, the comment about marketing, the need to advertise to different markets and look into collaborative marketing with other businesses. Comment about one, so we haven't heard this one yet, public art, that we really need to promote public art. It helps create the sense of identity and to help tell the town's story as people come to town. This touches onto some of the land use stuff, but really building around some of our good public projects like the Riverwalk Park. There's a lot of potential there. We need, again, to market that here. We need to market that off Cape. Great comment about permitting, and that if what we want to do is create additional entertainment opportunities for people, we need to make that permitting process more simple. Again, it's just through this process identifying what we want to do, making it easier to do it. Interesting comment about trying to encourage some investment in entertainment businesses, some of our mini golf, that type of thing, that are kind of historical components of our tourism economy, that we really need to find ways to find strategies to promote investment and improvement in those places. Walkability, Bass River and 6A, again, building onto the cultural district comment. Indoor entertainment, pickleball, golf, different kinds of things to do. There was mention about, I'm going to skip that. 'Cause I'm trying to go fast. I think another really interesting comment, and we're talking about, Jeff made the comment at the beginning about 10 years down the road and trying to think ahead. And then just listening to kind of Kathy at the very beginning of the meeting rattle off all of the different projects, all of the different work and this and that. We really need to focus on how are we going to mitigate the impact to our business community during those tough times. Someone made the comment about, the wastewater construction is really impacting Route 28 businesses. How are we going to cope with that and kind of help them kind of reinforce themselves during those times? Land use, the Great Island Plaza came up. Concept about really encouraging cross streets to help build. We have the Route 28, Mary Ann was talking about it, and how do we build village centers? So we were trying to come up with solutions, and how do we increase nodes of activity? And the concept, I thought it was a great idea, is just building on some of our cross streets, because Route 28 really is so shallow all along the ways. And looking at doing parking behind, coming up with redevelopment incentives, mixed use with market rate housing. Big conversation around that we really need to encourage market rate housing. That's how some of this redevelopment will actually happen and pencil out. New businesses, we talked a little bit about agriculture, aquaculture. A great idea came up about training for hospitality, working with 4Cs, working with other kind of incubator type organizations. New business, 2, large-scale indoor convention space. So what can we focus on Route 28? Which areas? All of them was the answer. Matikes. But also the comment that we need to focus on kind of the new economy that came up really strongly during COVID. Moving forward is keeping in mind all of that work from home industry that's happening. Maybe looking at a business incubator environment somewhere, and adding extra connectivity and keeping that connectivity affordable for people. Housing, another interesting comment. We had some really good ideas that I've never thought of. Looking at whether there's additional capacity for housing along Buck Island Road. We have a lot of condominium complexes. Is there a way to build up? Looking at co-housing, thinking ahead to our demographic of people aging in place and just trying to create more community. Mixed use, another great idea, incentivizing second-story development on 6A. There was a comment, a lot of the second stories on 6A are vacant, so how could we turn that into housing? Jump into the, what's the one? Question 5. Oh, also with housing, we want to promote the availability of social services, let people know what's in place already and encourage them to utilize. Look at how we can limit the short-term rentals, increase supply of housing. We really need, again, thinking about the market rate and some of this affordable housing development and being sensitive to the prices. Sometimes it's very hard to qualify for affordable housing. Just if you're making this much more, how can we deal with that? And then how do we leverage seasonal homes? We had the statistic of 32% of our housing stock being second homes, and how can we tap into that for some additional revenue in town? Coastal resiliency, kind of limit construction in sensitive areas. We really need to invest in our infrastructure, bridges and culverts, that type of thing. We want to look at protecting our infrastructure. Someone was giving examples around Gloucester where they're really building seawalls, I think, around some of the critical infrastructure, the schools even. And sustain, good comment, reuse existing structures, and solar and charging stations.
Great, thank you. One more, last group. Who's representing the last group?
That'd be
All right,
me.
Jim.
So I'm going to bring up the things that people haven't talked about. The first thing is walkability. Nobody's talked about walkability, so I thought I'd bring walkability. So I think that's a big issue is being able to create village areas where we have walking shops, etc. Some of the ways to do that is through tax incentives to encourage people to actually redevelop their properties by offering them tax incentives to do so. Along Route 28, we talked about the idea of having bus stops with signage to create a greater amount of mass transit throughout the community, get people off our roads. I know Kathy had mentioned that they're going to be redeveloping parts of Route 28 that's going to have bike paths, etc. So a lot of what we said, it sounds like, is already going along. And I swear to God, you all had your little microphones somewhere on our table because everything we said, you all said too. So stop stealing our ideas. Let's see, tax incentives, Route 28, make it more walkable. Did I tell you we should make it more walkable? Let's see, sewers are going to be a big influence on how we expand along Route 28 with business, et cetera. The idea of putting kiosks and informational spots along Route 28, creating an identity for the community so that we all are kind of rowing in the same direction. We're going to either promote mini golf in Pirate Cove, or we're going to promote history, or we're going to promote something else, but have a community identity that people say, hey, let's go to Yarmouth because X, Y, Z. The blue economy, taking advantage of what we've got here for our environment already, and there's actually an organization that's working towards blue economy on the Cape right now. Land use, well, I better put my glasses back on. More detailed restaurants along Route 6A. Yarmouth Port Village Center, obviously Matakees development and reuse, things like a convention center, sports facility, taking advantage of the ballparks that are already there, and a convention center, which the Cape lacks, athletic facilities, bringing in entertainment, taking advantage of the drive-in site property, which will have special events during the off-season. So like we have the St. Patrick's Day parade in the middle of March, but maybe we need a Halloween parade, or we need a Valentine's Day parade or something that's on those shoulders, to bring people to have events that draw people here to stay in our hotels and to eat in our restaurants, etc. The whole issue of ADUs are going to have a major impact on our community, whether we like it or not. The governor has made sure of that. ADUs are going to be by right, so almost anywhere in town you're going to be able to turn that garage into an apartment. So that's going to be able to address part of our aging in place issues, where people can grow old by having apartments, etc. Question is, how do we as a community work with what the governor has already done after we thought we had already got it done by spending a year and a half writing our ADU bylaw? How those are going to be implemented and how that's going to change the character of our community is something that we need to be aware of. Let's see, what's the other one? Climate change and climate and coastal resilience. Discouraging redevelopment along south of 28. Once we get these sewers in, it's going to be a bloodline. So maybe we discourage certain types of development south of 28, where they're going to be, in 20 years underwater, if you listen to some people, or still high and dry if you listen to others. But still taking those types of things into consideration when we start developing and redeveloping, because of the abilities that have been restricted because of things like sewering. Now we don't have this sewer restriction. What's going to happen in those areas, and how does that affect coastal resilience? We think that every town building should be solar. The town should buy hybrids and energy efficient vehicles. And I think that's enough for me, so that we can go home at a reasonable hour.
Great. That was absolutely fantastic. Such great feedback. This is 2 seconds just to wrap up. If you didn't sign in on your way in the room, if you can please sign up for notifications. That's the best way to stay in touch. The information is also available on the town's website, right on the banner. So that's one of the best things we can get, is for you to sign up, tell your neighbors or tell your friends that this is going on. Provide comments, so there's an opportunity to provide additional comments online. Participate in targeted action plans. We heard so much. One of the next steps in this process is to create a targeted action plan. So there'll be some additional opportunities for discussing that. And then the last one is really to just help adopt this at town meetings. So the target is fall town meeting. This is kind of a small, this is a small representation of the town of Yarmouth. So when it gets to town meeting, we hope that you come, we hope that you talk about the importance of the LCP and get it adopted, because without it being adopted, all these things can't start to happen. So I think with that, thank you so much, Kathy and Karen, and everyone who's been part of this, planning board members. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Adam.